Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello. Today we're going to hear about how the king, Pranjan, the citizen. Interesting how he's called the citizen. He's he's the citizen and he's also the king because he's the main citizen. Today we're going to hear how he does his own thing. Last week we just heard how he was completely doing everything that the queen did. This week we're going to hear about how he does his own thing. So I'll give you just, I'll just dunk you into the water and then teach you how to swim. I'll read you the whole thing and then we'll go back and look at it. Once, desiring to use his powerful bow, the king mounted a chariot with 5 swift horses, yoked by 2 shafts, attached to the main carriage by 2 posts. It had 2 wheels on 1 axle. 3 bamboos sat atop the axle, crossed by 5 support beams. The horses were on 1 rein, wielded by 1 driver. The carriage had 1 seat, surrounded by 5 storage compartments, and protected by 7 shields. Thus it could enable the king to adventure anywhere and everywhere. The king, ornamented in gold and wearing golden armor, boarded the chariot, carrying an infinite quiver of arrows and followed by 11 commanders. Intent on visiting 5 places, he rode off into the forest. So why don't we stop there? No, let's keep going. He abandoned his wife who did not deserve such treatment even for a moment, because he was lusty and greedy for forest meat. He wildly, arrogantly killed animals in the forest with his bow and arrows. He gave in completely to excessive force. His heart became terrible and merciless as he destroyed the creatures of the forest with his razor-sharp arrows. That's what we have to think about today. That's what I translated this week. So, what do you think all these things are? There's obviously an elaborate description of this chariot. Why such an elaborate description, and what is this chariot actually? Well, the chariot is actually the surrogate queen. If you'll come to that conclusion also when you see what the various parts are. So once upon a time, there's the king, he wanted to use a bow. So what does the bow symbolize? The bow symbolizes the sense of doing your own thing. Of wielding, also the bow symbolizes the sense of wielding your power. It's a tool for your power. It's a weapon, right? So he wanted to use his weapon. He wanted to explore or flaunt or use or enjoy his own power. So that's called a hankara, which is the sense of doership. I will use my power independently. Here is the one time where he went off without the queen. So the bow represents the sense that I will use my own power independently. Now he gets on this chariot. The chariot's going to be described in detail. But in summary, the whole chariot is another representation of intellect, like the queen. But the queen represents sattvic intellect, whereas the chariot represents intellect of rajas and tamas. So I don't know if those terms are familiar to everybody. I'm sure to most of you they are. The queen represents clear intellect. The chariot is a adaptation of the intellect, which is influenced by passion and greed, which is rajas, and anger and violence, which is tamas. So he desires to use his bow, so he gets on the chariot. Because the chariot is the passionate intelligence. The bow is, I want to use my power for myself. So when he wants to use the bow, he gets on the chariot. The chariot has 5 swift horses. That one is kind of obvious. What are the 5 things that are linked to the intelligence? The 5 things are the 5 senses. The 5 senses that gather knowledge. So the 5 horses are the 5 senses, and they said that they move very swiftly. So they're very good, strong, powerful senses. And they're yoked. Yoked means tied to something. They're yoked by 2 shafts that are attached to the main carriage by 2 posts. I actually had to spend some time looking up carriage construction, chariot and carriage construction and assembly to find out what all these things really were. This is not some of the chariots or carriages have this single yoke that the horses get on, which hurts the horses a bit. This one has 2 independent yokes. So it's got a 2-shaft yoke connecting to the chariot by 2 posts. So what is that? That is showing that the senses somehow are tied to the intellect, right? The yoking of the horses to the chariot represents the tie between the senses and the intellect. So what is it that ties the intellect to the senses, and why? The thing which ties the intellect to the senses will be the yoking posts, and the reason why is the nub that the chariot itself has for the yoking post. The thing that yokes the senses is described as mamatva and ahanka, something like that. The sense of I-ness and mindness. So this is just the forks of the doership or the ego. The doership has like a fork. Ego has a fork or 2 effects. One is that we have a sense of I, which is independent. We have an independent sense of I. And then we have an independent sense of possessiveness of mind. And the existence of the independent sense of I and independent sense of possessiveness is dependent upon the senses, the 5 senses. We can't possess anything without the 5 senses to experience the things that we possess. And we can't have a sense of I without the 5 senses to tell us who we are and who we aren't. So the posts that bind the 5 horses to the chariot is the sense of I on one side and the sense of mine on the other side. And then the 2 knobs that are on the chariot itself that the yoking posts connect to, that signifies why intellect connects to this, and why does it have the sense of I-ness and mindness? Because because it has hopes and regrets. These 2 things, these 2 yoking posts represent hopes and regrets. So it means whether or not hope and regret is if you succeed in getting the minds and eyes that you want, or whether you fail in getting the eyes and minds that you want through the senses. If you get to the destinations that you want for your eye and your mind, then the knobs on the chariot are happy. They're hope. They want to get there. That's why they're there. And they regret not getting there before. That's why they're there. You get it? So this chariot has these knobs that can connect to the senses because it wants to get somewhere and experience something with itself. And it wants to get away, or it wants to get away from something that it doesn't want to experience for itself. Therefore, it has I-ness and mindness connected to senses. And that's the horses connected by yokes to these knobs that are on this chariot. Now, it says it has 2 wheels on one axle, 3 bamboos atop the axle. So you got 2 wheels on one axle. So besides the wheels, then everything that it's going to talk about right now is stuff that you don't see when you look at a chariot. It's the undercarriage. So similarly, it's going to represent things that you actually don't see even in your psychology. They're not active parts of our psychology, but they're the undercarriage of the psychology. They're the undercarriage of our mental and emotional existence. Besides the wheels you can actually see. The wheels are on an axle. There's one axle. And the axle is really the most important part of the chariot. It's the thing that allows the chariot to move. Then the axle is supported by 3 things called venu, which is literally means bamboo. It's some kind of a pipe or a tube that, forms like the main skeleton for the chariot. And there's 3 of them. And then going the other direction across those 3 bamboos are 5 support beams. That's the undercarriage. So what are these things? The axle is this thing called pradhana, which is the basis for existence. And then the 3 tubes that the axle rides, carries are rajas, tamas, and sattva, the 3 gunas of pradhana, the 3 gunas of prakriti. So pradhana is like prakriti itself, and then the 3 gunas of prakriti are a little bit more experienceable. And then atop that, there's 5 beams that go across. Those are the 5 pranas. What are the 5 pranas? It's basically the 5 flows of nerve. The nervous circulation in the nervous system, or circulation in general. What did I write down here? Vital nerve signal flows. That's the undercarriage. You got this like nervous system and circulatory system, and then underneath that you have the qualities of the basic fundamental qualities like the RGB on a screen. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, and then below that you have Pradhan, or the basis of Prakriti itself. That's the stuff you can't see. Then the 2 things you can't see are these 2 wheels. The wheels are the actual moving part, right? It's the actual thing that literally moves the chariot. And it is those, what do you think those are? Those are actions. So the horses are the Gyanendriyas, the knowledge acquiring senses. The wheels are the Karmendriyas, the hands and the feet, etc., that move us around and let us perform actions. And why are there 2 wheels? Because one's on the left and one's on the right. You can turn left, you can turn right sometimes. So that means sometimes you can do whatever you want. You can do things that are good, you can do things that are bad. That could be morally speaking, or that could be practically speaking. You could do things that are successful or unsuccessful. All right. So once, desiring to use his powerful bow, the king mounted a chariot with 5 swift horses yoked by 2 shafts, attached to the main carriage by 2 posts. It had 2 wheels on one axle, 3 bamboos sat atop the axle, crossed by 5 support beams. Now, the horses, back to the horses. The horses are on one rein. That's the rope. And then the rein is in the hand of one driver. So this is a driver who actually, that looks like a person, but is considered a part of the carriage. The horses are one rein wielded by one driver, and then the carriage has 1 seat. That's where the Puranjana, the actual person, will sit. And then the seat, like in a modern car, you have a glove compartment. On carriages also, you had places to put your maps and places to just put stuff. So this particular carriage has 5 boxes surrounding the seat. And the carriage is just like a car also has, like, you know, a roof and walls and everything. A carriage has shields, walls, protections, roofs, especially the carriages that are for war, the chariots that are for war. So this chariot has 7 shields. And thus it could enable the king to adventure everywhere and anywhere. So let's see, what are these things now? The reins, the driver, the seat, the 5 compartments, and the 7 shields. What are those things? Well, the reins and the driver obviously are the things that control the senses. So the rein and the driver is the mind and the intellect. Which one is which? The driver is the intellect. I thought the whole chariot was the intellect. The whole chariot is the intellect because it's being driven by the driver. So it's like the extension of just like the whole city is the queen. So he's got kind of like a mobile city now, actually. But this driver is not the queen. That's the point. The driver is the intellect. The reins of the mind. Then they're controlling the senses and making them move. The seat is something called chitta or something called heart, which is the non-physical place, where the soul is. It's the conduit. It's the, what is it called? Interface point between the soul and the body. That's the seat on the chariot. The actual person will sit there. The compartments are, you could think of it as memory. How the intellect or the body or the machine that we have has memory to it, and also plans. And there's 5 because there's separate plans and memory, like maps go in these compartments. There's separate plans and memories for each of the 5 senses. And then the shields. The shields on the chariot are is analogous to the shields on this whole mind-body sense thing. The mind-body sense so far has been clearly described. The complex of our senses and mind and body and muscles, even, because the wheels are like the muscles. But not necessarily the physical muscles, but the movement or the movement ability and the manipulative abilities. They've been described. They're like psychological things. Then there's encasings for those things that give it physical structure and that protect those things. Those are called the 7 dhatus. It's basically the 7 components of the physical body. So the shields on the chariot are like the physical body. Specifically, the 7 dhatus is plasma, blood, muscle, fat, bone, nerves, and hormones. So that's the chariot. Now he moves on to describe the king. The king is ornamented in gold and wears golden armor, and then he boards the chariot carrying an infinite quiver of arrows and followed by 11 commanders. Intent on visiting 5 places, he rode off into the forest. So what's all this? Why is he wearing gold? What's the gold signify? Remember the city, when the city was described, it had houses with windows and doors, and the roofs of the houses were either bronze, silver, or gold. I think actually the silver ones were the mode of goodness. The gold ones are the mode of passion, and the bronze ones are the mode of ignorance. So the gold represents that he's covered in passion. And he's got an infinite quiver of arrows. So the reason why he gets on the chariot is because he's covered with passion. And that's signified by him ornamenting and armoring himself in gold. Reminds me of Minecraft. You can make gold armor. He has an infinite quiver. What does that mean? The quiver is where you keep the arrows. Remember, the bow is really the thing that he wants to use. The bow is the ahankar, the sense that I can use my power. The infinite quiver of arrows means I have infinite desires to use it. So the desire is described as having no count. It's infinite. The arrows have no count. Everything else is 5, 3, 1, 2. But arrows, infinite. That means we have infinite desires to use our power and use our abilities. He didn't go alone. He was followed by 11 commanders. What are those guys? Well, 11 should clue you off because there's 11 senses altogether. There's 5 knowledge acquiring senses, there's 5 action senses, and then there's the coordinator of the senses, which is the mind. The senses required, remember like when the city gates were described, there was a friend who helps the person move along the path, helps the king move along the path. The senses require a power user, a user to use them, like not just the soul. Each sense has to have a capacity to it. For example, when you close your eyes, you can see a tree, or you can see melon, or you could see the moon, or whatever you want to see, you can imagine with your mind, even though you don't see it with your eyes, because you have the mental power of seeing in the mind. And it utilizes the nerves, the optic nerves, and the physical eyeball. So the physical eyeball and the optic nerves is all the physical sense for seeing, which is like the horse, one of those 5 horses. The commander who's in command of that horse is the power, is like the power of sight, the power of hearing. So it takes these 11 commanders. And he wants to go to 5 places. 5 places. He wants to go to the place where you can hear things. He wants to go to the place where you can feel things, taste things, smell things, and see things. And he wants to go to them through the forest. This means that he wants to go into the wild. He wants to get away from the city and the queen. Any questions so far? So that's the complete description of his chariot, all the different parts of the chariot, what it represents, and him and his entourage, what they all represent. Next, he's going to go into the forest. Let's see if you have any questions about any of that. All of this functions as described only if consciousness gets projected into a human form. It will be slightly different for other forms. Remember, before arriving, Bardo asked that question. Remember, before Puranjan arrived at this particular city that he's in now, he was in many other cities. And those other cities were interesting and good, but it's not perfect for him. So, and remember, the intellect, the queen, had been with him in all the other cities, but she changes her face a bit in each city. And that's why he doesn't recognize her each time he meets her. So it's a very similar, depending on how different the city is from this particular city, which is a human city, then affairs may be slightly different, but basically they're quite the same. Some cities might not have all 5 horses. Some cities might not have all 9 gates, right? Etc. But it's basically the same for any life form. The 5 boxes, the 5 horses are the senses, the 5 boxes are the memory and plans for the senses, the 7 shields are the 7 layers of the body. Melissa, is the chariot ride like the fantasy making that leads us away from reality? Well, no, it's just that he's not in reality in the city either. But in the city, he's with the sattvic intellect. And on the chariot, he's not. The difference is that, remember what the queen promised him? She said, if we marry, then you'll enjoy pleasures with wealth and integrity. Which means that you'll be able to enjoy kama, artha, and dharma. So you'll have long-term pleasures which are not fleeting and don't cause distress. If you stay with me, I'll give you that. I'll teach you that. I'll show you that. So if we stay with the sattvic intelligence, we enjoy, I don't want to say a fantasy or an illusory existence, but a non-reality centric existence in a more positive way. If we go away from the queen, then the intellect loses the sattvicness and it becomes influenced by rajas and tamas, the wild, the forest. And then you'll see what it does. It engages in immediate gratification of immediate desires, which bring suffering to others and to oneself in the future. So what the chariot ride represents is when the soul gets tired of following the intellect. The king, remember the previous thing that we were talking about all the time was when the queen would sit, the king would sit. When the queen would eat, the king would eat. When the queen would sleep, the king would sleep. So after a while, the king gets a little tired of that. So I want to do something on my own. I have my own bow. Let me go use it. I don't want to be guided all the time by my intellect. I want to get wild. So when he does that, he gets on his own chariot and he goes off into the forest. And then we'll see what's going to happen next. Samurai Mama says, Zena, they're not 7 centers. They're not related to chakras. There's 7 layers. There's 7 dhatus: plasma, blood, bone, nerve, hormone, and muscle. Maybe skin, I forget. It's something, if you were an Ayurvedic person, you would know these like by heart. Samurai Mama says, the sense of I am mind appears before or after Brahma creates ignorance. It cannot appear before. Brahma doesn't create ignorance, but he enables ignorance. And that enables I and mind. If one of the legs of the horses is injured, then that would be symbolic of an injury to one of your senses. I don't know why, Bardo, she seems more like the mind to you. All right, now I'm going to go back to the story and tell you what happens next. What happens when the king gets on this chariot? He abandons his wife. He leaves his wife in the city. And then, here, let me read you some of the Sanskrit, actually. The stuff about the chariot is pretty boring. Nothing special with the Sanskrit there. But let's start with Sanskrit here. Chachara mrigayang tatra dripta atteshu karmukha. Vihaya jayam atad arham. Mriga vyasana lalasa. You hear mriga often? You guys know mriga shirsha, right? And actually in the Taittiriya Sutra for mriga shirsha, you hear a lot about mrigayu, which is what he's going to do. Mrigayam. Mrigayam is what he did. Hunting. But he says vihaya jayam. He gave up his wife. He left his wife behind. Atad artam, she did not deserve that treatment. Even for a moment, atat. Atat arham means that she didn't deserve it, but it's one of the translations I saw. It gives a sense of like, not even for a moment, which I thought has a nice feeling with atat. So I included it in mine. He abandoned his wife who did not deserve it. I could make it simple like that. We never, the sattvic intellect never deserves to be abandoned. That's the point. Even if you think you're a great big spiritualist and you're going to become a sannyasi and you don't need sattvic intellect, you need sattvic intellect. Krishna says it in Bhagavad Gita that these good pious deeds which bring material satisfaction should never be abandoned, even by spiritualists. So he abandoned his wife who did not deserve it. Why? Mriga Vyasana Lalasa. Because he's lusty and greedy, Vyasana Lalasa, and Vyasana also means evil. Because he had an evil greed for mriga, for meat, for animals. In the city from his wife, he's getting cultured things. Nice things, vegetarian things, things that are beneficial to everybody. But in his heart, he has a wildness. He has an evil lust and need for something that's not beneficial for everybody, something that's beneficial only to him. He wants meat, mriga. He wants an animal. So he goes to the forest and he leaves her behind, because if he took her with her, she would stop him from doing this. Then, with wildness and arrogance, which is dripta, Hichachara Mrigayam, he started hunting wildly with his arrows and bow. Okay? He abandoned his wife, who did not deserve it, because he was lusty and greedy for forest meat. He wildly, arrogantly killed animals in the forest with his bow and arrow. So the point here is that if you give up your sattvic intelligence, you're going to become evil. You're going to become vyasana if you give up sattvic intelligence. Sattvic intelligence means the thing which plans how to fulfill your desires in a beneficial way, in a communal way. If you give that up, you're going to still try to fulfill your desires, but you're going to try to do it in a non-communal way, in a selfish way. That's going to implicate you in bad karmas. So you should never give up that intellect. When we want more than what she provides, when do we give it up? When we feel impatient with the compromises and the sameness and the equality that sattvicness entails. Yes, you can eat a wonderful feast after you feed people. Okay, great. I want to just eat without feeding people first. That will make us want to give up the sattvic thing that says, no, feed people first, then eat. So when we want more than what the sattvic nature provides, then we go away from sattvic nature. We go to passion and greed. And those things are called forbidden, right? Forbidden. And then forbidden actually has this like sexy taboo to it, but actually forbidden is just forbidden. And the reason why it's forbidden is because it causes pain and suffering. It's not forbidden because somebody wants to stop you. This is the lie that we tell ourselves when we coach ourselves into going to passion. Oh, it's forbidden because somebody's trying to keep us from it. They want to keep it all to themselves. It's actually forbidden because it's bad for you and bad for everybody. So when we want more, when we want what's forbidden, then the stuff that we're getting doesn't satisfy us anymore. We want what we can't get. When we want what we can't get, then we go outside. We leave aside the sattvic intellect. And that is going to implicate us in exploiting and injuring other creatures. What does the king do with his bow? He goes out and he kills animals. What do we do when we want things that are forbidden, when we want more than what we get? We go and we steal it from other people, whether legally or illegally. We trick them into thinking they need what we want, what we can sell them. We trick them into just giving us our money. We trick them into losing their money. We trick them into giving us their body. We trick them into giving us their trust. We do all kinds of trickery and deceit. We shoot them with arrows to get what we want from them. So this is exactly symbolic. When the king leaves the queen, he goes out and he kills animals. We should never abandon sattvic intellect because it fulfills our desires without implicating us in misdeeds. But when we want more or other than what she provides, then our evil greeds for forbidden things cause us to exploit or injure other creatures. And it's also very interesting that he sees that they're depicted here in the allegory as animals. He's a human, they're animals. It's the same mentality that we have when we're motivated by lust and greed. I'm a human, the rest of you guys are animals. Basically, which means I'm superior to all of you, which means I'm important. You're not. I'm more important than you. So your suffering is tolerable because you're not as important as I am. And I get your money. You suffer by not having money, but I enjoy by having your money. And the fact that I enjoy is more important than the fact that you suffer because you're just a deer and I'm a king. So you see, also, if you don't let yourself have this hierarchical view of superiority over other people for various excuses, whatever excuses you can think of, your skin is this color, your genitals are this shape, you have this many fingers, that many hands, your hair is this short or this long, whatever. Your parents are from this gotra. Whatever reason you could think of to be higher or than somebody else, if you can give that up, you'll get back to your sattvic intelligence. You won't be able to stick with your type of intellect and planning that lets you do bad karmas. Okay, so he abandoned his wife who did not deserve it because he was lusty and greedy for forest meat. He wildly, arrogantly killed animals in the forest with his bow and arrows. He gave in completely to excessive force. So this is also what happens. He gave in completely to excessive force. His heart became terrible and merciless as he destroyed the creatures of the forest with his razor-sharp arrows. This is just what happens. The more we indulge in greed and selfishness, the more we become consumed by such things. Eventually, we transform into terrible monsters who only trouble other beings. It's the snowball effect. It's actually the way that karma works, is that karma produces a pollen or a seed as well as a fruit. And that seed grows more of the same karma. So in other words, when you do something and get away with it, that inclines you to do it again. And then now that you've done it twice, you have two of those seeds. Your field of that type of activity gets bigger and bigger in your heart. So pretty soon, what starts off as, I don't know, that animal over there, it's a tiger. It's not a harmless animal. Let me shoot it. Wow, that was cool. That's cool. I'm going to eat that. That's cool. There's another one. Let's try it again. Here's another animal. Oh, it's not a tiger. It's a deer, but oh, it's not that hard. Let me do it. Ooh, I could do it with it. That's how it goes. Just a little bit, just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit, everything. The Pringles, what are they called? Or Frito-Lays or something where you can't just take one? What do you mean? It's not a big deal that you can't just take one. You can't just take one of anything. Who can just take one of anything? Only if you don't really like it that much in the first place. So this is the nature of activity, is that it always inclines us to do more of the same activity because karma bears fruit and fruit has seeds in it. So you want to make sure that you put in your effort to do sattvic deeds, good deeds, deeds that are communally beneficial, deeds that are egalitarian and equal to everybody and aren't self-centric. Because those deeds also bear fruit with seeds in it. So that's it for today. You got any questions about this? The next section, because I look ahead, of course, before I actually get down to nitty-gritty and translate it. The next section is going to be interesting because somebody's going to complain. I guess Barishat, because Narada Muni is telling the story to Barishat. Narada Muni is telling Barishat a story. He's making up a story about Paranjana, the story. So probably Barishat or something raises a weird eyebrow or has a question or something. But kings are allowed to hunt. And so they're going to address that point in the next section. Like, aren't we allowed to do some stuff for ourselves? That's the next section. So let's see. You have any questions about what we talked about today? He's not going to the forest to learn something. Liberty. Robbie, I don't know, man. Sattvic is a very tiring thing to be. Sattvic is not tiring. Sattvic is not tiring. Sattvic is not tiring. Sorry. Rajas is so tiring. That's why Rajas leads to Tamas. Tamas is sleep. Rajas is exertion. Sattva is just placidity. What's tiring or difficult is to change a state to change momentum to change energy from one state to another, or to change direction. That's tiring. Sattva is not tiring at all. Rajas is actually tiring. It's exhausting. But any effort to change is also tiring. So what you're experiencing is the effort to change from one guna primarily to another is tiring, yes. That you better make those efforts. And the tiringness will get less, because the more you do a little bit, the more you get seeds from it that make it easier to do it again. And then he says something about vegetarianism. Ravi says, wouldn't vegetarianism still face the problem of turning animals into slaves? No. And that's not a problem. We're not killing them. You don't kill animals. It's not possible. The Jains have tried to take it to an extreme of how to implement the concept of ahimsa. But it becomes rather ludicrous. And even if you become a Jain, you can't avoid ahimsa unless you want to die, because you wouldn't kill bacteria that infect you. Or you wouldn't let your body destroy them naturally. Or in fact, you wouldn't eat a vegetable. So perfect nonviolence is not an option in a system where Bhagavan is absent. There's always some amount of self-centered activity which is required. But the principle of nonviolence is to minimize the violence as far as you are able. So it applies differently to different varnas, different ashrams, different people at different stages of life. What is the source of the king's lust and evil drives and desires? I don't know. I think the source of the king's lust is that the soul itself has the basic lust. The soul itself is consciousness. So consciousness has a basic lust, which is to experience. And then because the king is involved remember the first thing in the allegory is that he has a friend whose name he doesn't know and whose actions he doesn't know. Because of that, he never really becomes happy through any of his deeds. So when we're missing happiness, we feel something is wrong or something is taken away from us, so we either feel angry or sad. And when you feel angry or sad, then you try to do something about it. So you'll try to move away from if the sattvic thing is still making you unfulfilled, then you'll move away and try something else. Let's see if there's any other questions here that are on point. Bardo, but in this dualistic reality, how would you know what is sattvic good without experiencing the dark side? That's pretty ridiculous. Sorry, I'm mean. I'm a mean person. This is pretty ridiculous because it's like saying you can't know what light is unless you know what darkness is. And you can know what light is because light is light. Actually, you can't know what darkness is unless you know what light is. You have to be able to separate the substance and the non-substance. This is an important part of Nyaya. What has bhava and what is abhav? Some things are absences of other things and not things unto themselves. For example, death is the absence of life, or black is the absence of color. Black is the absence of light. Dark is the absence of light. So you don't need to know what dark is to know what light is, but you do need to know what light is to know what dark is, or the presence of darkness implies the existence of light. So the idea that you can't know that something is sattvic unless you know what's rajasic and tamasic is incorrect. Sattvic means to act for the good of the community. That's your simple definition. Why do you have to go and experience what it's like to act for your selfishness, to understand what it means to act for the community? You don't have to. But this kind of question thing, like, isn't it kind of okay what the king is doing, is the question that comes up next in the narration, and so we'll cover next week. Sina says, so sattvic is placid, rajasic is tiring in itself. Please, what is tamas? Sattvic is placid, rajasic is motivated, and tamasic is sleepy. So tamas is what happens after rajas. Rajas is where you feel like exerting your energy, and then what you feel like after you exert your energy is tamas. Even in the most basic thing where tamas is solid and rajas is fiery, after you exert your energy, rajas is energy. After you exert your energy, you create something solid, even in like the universal cosmic scope of rajas, tamas, sattva. What kind of state creates a neutral or static karma? Chika asks. A neutral karma is called akarma. It would be done. It would really only be done through bhakti yoga, according to Bhagavad Gita. If you do sattvic karma, then you get good results. If you do rajasic or tamasic karma, then you get bad results. What will you get? Neutral results? Maybe what you're thinking is more along the line of you get a mixture of the two from mixed things. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me today. I'll see you again next week for the Pal Deepika and the Bhagavatam.